Algebra and geometry? Yuck! But Miss Pocket Roni can help you.
Today we're going to be doing solving quadratic equations. Quadratic means it's going to have a square. The highest exponent will be a square for quadratic equations. Now look at x squared minus 11x plus 30, and then look at x squared minus 11x plus 30 equals 0, and tell me the difference between those two things. Notice one has equal to 0 and the other one does not. When you have an equal sign, that is called an equation because you have an equal sign. When there is no equal sign, this is called an expression. And in the world of algebra, you're going to have two words that you hear a lot: simplify and solve. When you have an expression, meaning no equal sign, you simplify it. You're reducing it. You're making it as small as possible. So you're simplifying it. When you have an equation, which you have an equal sign, you can solve for the variable. Today, that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be solving for the variable x. Because now we have an equal sign here. Okay? When you have a quadratic equation with a square, your highest exponent will tell you how many solutions you will have. For quadratic equations with the highest exponent of 2 means we will have 2 solutions for x. I have written in words step by step of what you do for each problem. The very first thing that you want to do for your equations is to make sure you set it equal to 0. Then your next step is you're going to factor. Remember to look to see if you have a greatest common factor that you can factor out first. Then you will set each of your factors equal to 0, and then you will solve for x. And remember, we just said if your highest exponent is 2, you should have 2 solutions for x. And then the last thing is to check. Okay? Let's just do what I said these steps are over here with 27b, 4 through 6. We have the equation x squared minus 11x plus 30 equals 0. The first thing we always want to make sure is, step 1 is it set equal to 0? Yes, I have 0 over here on the right of my equal sign. The next step, factor. Can I factor anything out first? No. So I'm ready to factor into my 2 parentheses. So I do this, and I'm still carrying this equal to 0 out here. So x, this is positive, but this is negative. Remember, another way to get a positive is by having negative, negative. Then factors of 30, I see I'm going to need 5 and 6. Check this mentally to make sure that you have factored correctly. If you do not factor correctly, you will not get the correct solutions. But this will give me a negative 6x and a negative 5x, and that does give me a negative 11x. And negative 5 times a negative 6 does give me a positive 30. Step number 3 was set each factor equal to 0. So what we do is we set x minus 5 equal to 0, and then we set x minus 6 equal to 0. I don't really need my parentheses. What we're saying here is if this whole parentheses, let me get my different color here. If I was to say that this whole set of parentheses was 0, if this whole thing was 0, 0 times anything will equal 0, and it makes this statement true. The same is true if I set x minus 6 equal to 0. If I said this whole parentheses was equal to 0, if that whole parentheses was 0, then 0 times whatever this is will make this statement true. And that's how we end up solving for x. We are trying to solve for values of x that will make the right side equal 0, that will make this statement true. So this is the way that we do that. We set each one of these parentheses equal to 0. Set this parentheses equal to 0. And now this is just an algebra problem. X minus 5 equals 0. You basically move your 5 over to where you have x equals 0 plus 5. It's just 5. And now do you see if I put 5 in right here for x, 5 minus 5 is 0. 0 times whatever this is 0, and it makes this statement true. So that is one solution for x. Over here, add 6 to each side. X equals 6, and that is my second solution for x. My highest exponent is a 2, so I should have 2 solutions for x. X can either be 5 or x can be 6, and it will make this statement true. The way that you check it is you take this, you take your first solution and put it back in everywhere you see an x. So I'm going to take my 5 and put it back in everywhere I see an x. So up here I would have 5 squared minus 11 times 5 plus 30 equals 0. This statement should be true. 5 squared is 25, 11 times 5 is 55, plus 30. And this statement will be true. 25 minus 55 is a negative 30, and negative 30 plus 30 does equal 0, and so that checks. Okay, now let's check my second solution. Take this and put it back in for x in my original equation. So I would have 6 squared minus 11 times 6 plus 30 equals 0. 6 squared is 36 minus 66 plus 30 equals 0. 36 minus 66 is a negative 30 plus 30, and that is a true statement. So therefore, both of these checked out. These x equals 5 and x equals 6 is the only solutions that when you put them back into this in for x will make the right side equal 0. So those are your 2 solutions for this equation. Okay, let's go down to 27a, 10 through 12. Our first step is always, when we're solving, the instructions are to solve. The first step is always set it equal to 0. It's already set equal to 0. My second step is to factor. The first thing you always look for is, can I factor anything out? I cannot factor anything out, so I'm ready to go to 2 parentheses, and I'm still going to set it equal to 0. Okay, so I know that I'm not in a positive world. I know this will be a 2x and an x. My only factors of 3 are 3 and 1, but I've got to get a negative 7 here. So I'm going to put a 3 here, 1 here. If I do 2x times 3, I can see I can get a negative 6, then a negative 1, and then a negative 1 times a negative 3 gives me a positive 3. Mentally check this to see if this is factored right. Foil it back out in your brain to make sure that you have it factored right. And I do see that this will be a negative 3x, a negative 6x, and a negative 1x, which gives me a negative 7. A negative 1 times a negative 3 gives me a positive 3. Now our third step is to set each one of these factors. This is one factor, this is your second factor. So I set each factor equal to 0, 2x minus 1 equal to 0, and then I set x minus 3 equal to 0. My step 4 was to solve for x. Okay, over here, I see I add 3 to each side, and then one of my solutions will be x equals 3. My highest exponent was a 2 on this problem, so I should have 2 solutions. Going to here, add 1 to each side, so I have 2x equals 1. Now divide by 2, x equals 1/2. It is okay to have fraction solutions on these. It's okay. They're not always going to be a whole number. So one of our solutions is x equals 1/2. One solution is x equals 3. Okay? Now we go back and check. I'm going to do my whole number first because it's easier to check with my whole number. When you check, you take your x value and put it back in everywhere you see an x to see if the left side equals the right side. We are trying to get the left side to equal 0. So I would say 2 times 3 squared, that's 2x squared, minus 7 times 3 plus 3 equals 0. So that's 3 squared is 9. 9 times 2 is 18. 7 times 3 is 21. 18 minus 21 is negative 3. And negative 3 plus 3 is 0, and that does check. Now let's check our fraction. So we're going to put this back in everywhere we see an x. So we have 2 times 1/2 squared minus 7 times 1/2 plus 3 equals 0. Okay, 1/2 squared is 1/4. So I have 2 times 1/4 because that's 1/2 times 1/2 minus, this is like 7 over 1, that would be minus 7/2 plus 3 equals 0. I'm going to scooch over. 2 times 1/4, that's like 2 over 1. So that would be 2/4 minus 7/2 plus 3 equals 0. I'm going to reduce my 2/4 down to 1/2, so I have the same denominator. You can either work with your fractions or you can get rid of your fractions like we have done in other lessons. If you get rid of your fractions, you can multiply everything by a 2. It has to be everything, every term by a 2. Then you see that cancels and you have 1. Those cancels and you have minus 1 plus 6 equals 0. That didn't check out correctly. Oh, I need a 7 right here. That's a 7/2. So that would be 1 minus 7. That wasn't a 1/2. 7/2. So that the 2 and 2 cancel, leave a 7 right there. So 1 minus 7 is negative 6. Negative 6 plus 6 is 0. So you can see when mine didn't check, I either did something wrong in the checking or my solution was wrong. But I made a mistake in my checking. So be careful, especially when you have fractions. So that did check. So that means x equals 1/2 is one of my solutions. Alright, we're now looking at 27D, number 5. X squared minus 2x plus 5 equals 8. Remember, your first step is to set it equal to 0. This whole thing should be set equal to 0. Meaning 0 needs to be on the right-hand side of your equation. Right now, it's not. So we need to move that 8 over. We need to make this number a 0. Well, we do that by subtracting 8. Because 8 minus 8 is 0. If we subtract 8 from the right-hand side, we have to subtract 8 from the left-hand side. So now that cancels and becomes 0, and here we can combine our whole numbers. So our new equation would be x squared minus 2x, a positive 5 and negative 8 is now a negative 3, and then our right-hand side is now 0. It's very important that your right-hand side be set equal to 0. Step number 2 was to factor. There's nothing to factor out, so we're ready to go straight to 2 parentheses. We still set it equal to 0. X, this is a negative, so we need to have a positive and a negative. And the factors of 3, 3, 1. This gives me a negative 3x and a positive 1x, which gives me a negative 2. It's very important to mentally check that. Now step number 3 was to set each one of these factors equal to 0. So we set x plus 1 equal to 0, and then x minus 3 equal to 0. Now we just take this and solve for x. Subtract your negative 1. 0 minus 1 is negative 1. It's okay to have a negative solution. And then add 3 to each side. X equals 3. Remember, look at your highest exponent. My highest exponent was a 2, which means that I should have 2 solutions. Now we check. Okay, take each one of your numbers, each one of your solutions, and put it back in everywhere you see an X. And then your left side should equal your right side. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and check. I'm going to check right over here. So I'm going to start with negative 1. So putting in here, negative 1, parentheses square. When you have a negative, that means a negative 1 times a negative 1. Use your parentheses to help you because that is not the same. That would be a negative 1. Use parentheses to show negative 1, parentheses squared. Minus 2 times negative 1, keep up with your negatives, plus 5 should equal 8. So negative 1 times negative 1 is a positive 1. A negative 2 times a negative 1 is a positive 2. Plus 5 should equal 8. 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 plus 5 is 8, and 8 equals 8. And so yes, that does check. Okay, now we can check our x equals 3 solution. So that would be 3 squared minus 2 times 3 plus 5 equals 8. So 3 squared is 9 minus 6 plus 5 equals 8. 9 minus 6 is 3, and 3 plus 5 is 8, and that does check. Alright, let's move down here to 27A, 4 through 6. Here we have x cubed minus 3x squared plus 2x equals 0. You look at your highest exponent. Here we do not have a quadratic equation anymore. Quadratic equation means your highest exponent is a square. This is not a quadratic equation. You look at your highest exponent, and your highest exponent will tell you how many solutions we have. Our highest exponent is a 3, so we should have 3 solutions for x. Alright? So the first step is it set equal to 0? It is set equal to 0, so now we're ready to go to step 2, which is factor. You look for a greatest common factor. I can't factor anything out of my numbers, but I can factor out an x. So I'm going to factor out an x. That leaves me x squared minus 3x plus 2, still setting equal to 0. Now I can factor this trinomial. X, that's ready to go to 2 parentheses. So that's an x and x. That's a positive and a negative, which tells me these both need to be a negative. And then 2 and 1. Make sure that these 2 parentheses foil back into that. Negative 1x, negative 2x does give me a negative 3x. A negative 2 times a negative 1 does give me a positive 2. Now step number 3 was to set each factor equal to 0. This is a factor, that is a factor, and that is a factor. I have 3 factors, okay? So I've got to set each one of those equal to 0. Setting this very first one equal to 0 just means x equals 0. That is one of my solutions. Okay, do not leave this one out. It's very important. Now I set my x minus 2 equal to 0, and then I set my x minus 1 equal to 0. Solving for x in this one, move my 2 over, x equals 2. That is my second solution. Moving my 1 over, x equals 1. That is my third solution. Now you can check each one of these, okay? So if I took this one and put 0 in everywhere for x, I'll write it out, but you can see 0. 3 times 0 is 0. 2 times 0 is 0. It's all zeros, but I'm going to write it out over here. I'm going to check over here. So putting in 0 for x, 0 cubed minus 3 times 0 squared plus 2 times 0 equals 0. 0 cubed is 0. 0 times anything is 0. 0 times anything is 0. It doesn't matter. This is all 0. That checks. Now I can put in 2 to check. So that would be 2 cubed minus 3 times 2 squared plus 2 times 2 equals 0. 2 cubed, 2 times 2 times 2, 8. 2 squared is 4, times 3 is 12. 2 times 2 is 4. 8 minus 12 is negative 4, and negative 4 plus 4 equals 0, so that solution checks. Now let's check our very last one, 1. 1 cubed minus 3 times 1 squared plus 2 times 1 equals 0. 1 cubed is still 1. 1 times 1 times 1. Minus 3 times 1 squared. 1 squared is 1. And 1 times 3, 3. 2 times 1, 2. 1 minus 3 is negative 2. Negative 2 plus 2 is 0. And so that checks. So these are your 3 solutions.